welcome, gentlemen. You guys doing good?
Yeah,
Doing great, man.
All right, very good. Well, hey, thank you for joining us. You tuned in because you want to hear more about missions and what we do here at HDC, and more specifically, some of the trips that each one of these guys are leading over the summer. And so just wanted to kind of give our folks an idea of what missions is, maybe a little bit about who a missionary is, and then also just to share some more about our trips and how our folks can be praying for us. So why don't we just jump right in? What is the Great Commission, right? We throw that phrase around a lot. I think we use it a lot, but sometimes people don't understand. And Jody, you're the one with the Bible here. You're the you're the holy one of our group here. I don't know if you want to share a little bit.
Yeah, I think in the simplest way, right? The Great Commission, it's this commandment, if you will, commissioning that Jesus gives there just at the end of the Gospel of Matthew 28, to go to the nations, right, and baptize and equip. And so much of what we do missions-wise is born out of that commissioning. We see that carry into the book of Acts as well. But, when we talk about the Great Commission, we're probably most likely pointing at that Matthew 28 passage.
Yep, definitely. Yep. Yeah, and what's interesting too is, for most of us, we think of that's the only part of the Bible that's like missional. But the reality is we see God working missionally throughout all of Scripture. Yeah. And so even back in Genesis, that idea of Abraham, leaving his people to go to a land that God called him to go to. Right. There's that first kind of, idea of that. But, even I think we overlook the fact that Jesus himself, like God sent his son to be a representative of God to the world, but ultimately to, save humanity from their sins. And so, God himself is a missionary God, right? Right. And so, I think missions can get kind of confusing though, right? People have different ideas. There's obviously a lot of different work that can be done in the world of missions. We see Bible translation, church planning. Those are some big ones that we really focus on here at HDC. But we see medical professionals going to the nations to use their skills to obviously provide a felt need, but then that's not their primary purpose of being there, right? Like they're there to share the gospel. We see people like engineers and, just other types of professions that will leave their home and go with the purpose of sharing the gospel, specifically to unreached people groups. And so that's kind of what missions is, right? Going to unreached people groups, places that the gospel is not prevalent. And we have short-term mission trips that we're going to talk about that we ourselves are doing this summer. There's midterm. Here at HDC, we would say that's anything that's kind of up to 2 years. And then we have long-term missionaries that are really anything over 2 years. But the reality is we support missionaries here that, man, they've been in the field 20, 30 years now at this point. So when we say long-term, these are people that are committed.
Long-term, right?
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. So that's kind of the idea. But, guys, go ahead and jump in and chime in on things with.
Like, what I love about the Great Commission, and I'm going back to like specifically the passage, right? Matthew 28, is the fact that, it is a command. Like what Jody said, it's a command. And then on top of it, he's giving it to the 11, right? And then he says, go obey or teach them, speaking about who they're going to disciple, to obey everything I have commanded you.
Right.
And this is a command itself, which I just love because even if we think about church history for a second, like the thought was mission, the whole mission was to the 11 apostles, right? For a long time in church history, but that's not the case. Like it is that itself is a command to be obeyed, and by it being to be obeyed, we're called to missions as well.
For all disciples.
Yeah, we're all disciples, right? And so we're all called to carry out missions. Now that doesn't mean we're all called to be missionaries,
right?
But we're all called to partake in missions.
Absolutely.
So I just love that idea.
Yeah.
So.
And I love the fact that, like, just to hit on what you're saying, is that there is a distinction between being a missionary and living missionally, right? Yeah. And so like you said, some people are called to go out and, short-term, midterm, and then long-term mission field and, leave their, homes and comforts and stuff. But I think also living missionally is another aspect that like we do every day, when we're out and whether our job careers, our fields, things like that. And, and so missions isn't just a, global thing. It's very personal and private as well when we go on our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's a good point too. That idea of a missionary versus living missional, and you kind of said that where living missional is something we all do, but I guess what makes a missionary compared to like me, who's not a missionary, that is to just called live missional? What would be the difference? Would you guys say?
Yeah, I think in Romans 10, I love this passage, but we see this idea of, unbelievers. How are they supposed to get the gospel? He's not talking just about all unbelievers, but specifically about those unbelievers in other nations. How are they supposed to get the gospel unless people go get them the gospel, right? Unless preachers go, and kind of ties that into Isaiah. But how are those preachers then to go unless someone sends, right? And so there's this element of the church coming alongside, sending missionaries, and so that in itself is somewhat thinking missional, right? The missionary is the missionary, right? The person being sent is the missionary. The people partaking, helping that missionary get there, are thinking missional. And on top of it, even going back to the Great Commission, thinking, everybody's called to this idea of evangelism, right? Sharing the gospel. Right. Then in that's kind of what we talk about with oikos, right? We're called to go and share the gospel with those people that God has placed in our life.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's kind of missional as well.
Nice. So basically what I'm hearing is living missional is for everybody, any believer, right? We're all called to live missional, right? Missionally. And then, but when it comes to going to the nations, the missionary is the one that's going. The people living missional are sending.
Yes,
exactly. From what you're saying.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we live missionally even within our own context here in the high desert, right? So, so yeah, it's I think all of us are called to live missionally, like you said, with oikos, right? We've got our 8 to 15 people that God supernaturally and strategically places in our life that we should be living out the gospel and putting it in front of them regularly. But yeah, the missionary is the one going to the unreached people groups. Yeah. We got a good idea of what missions is. We got a good idea of what a missionary is, and then living missional, which is for all of us. And so this summer, predominantly what people just tuned in to listen about is about the trips that we're going to be doing. And so each one of us have different trips that we're doing, and I want to give you each an opportunity to share with our folks what you're doing, who you're taking with you, what you're doing, that kind of stuff, and why it's important. So Jody, you're first.
Yeah, I think, for students, obviously we're taking quite a few trips this year. We just had a young adult trip as well. And maybe it'd be helpful to start kind of the reason and the broader things. I think some people, it's easy to think we do things because we're supposed to. Oh, of course you're supposed to do a mission trip. That's what youth groups do. Or you're supposed to go to camp because that's what. And for us, that's never been the case, when we've tried to do that over the last several years. I think there's a long-term plan there for us where, even going back a little bit to that Great Commission, right? That whole idea of Jerusalem, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Like, we've got some here where we'll serve. We've got some further. We're trying to walk them out, further and further to the nations. So we've just had our big serve event for junior high, which serves here locally and in the desert. And then from there, obviously, we've got a junior high trip a little bit further to Arizona. We'll have students in San Francisco, and then for this year, for the first time, Montreal on the student side of things. And all of those, again, we're trying to place students in different contexts among different people to hopefully walk them closer to the reality of what it looks like, not just to live missionally, because in many cases, what we'll do there, they could do here. But also, the hope would be that when a student's graduating or thinking through their career, or we've got a young adult who's stepping into that space, missions is on the table. Like, how can I use my degree? How can I use what I'm wanting to do with my life to advance the gospel, whether that's here or that's around the globe? So, that's kind of where we're at. Ethan obviously is leading our trip to Arizona. Carlos will be leading a trip to San Francisco, and then I'll be up in Montreal this year. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about those.
Sure.
Kind of individually, maybe.
So we're going to Rainbow Acres. We're excited for that trip. We're taking 12 junior high students and 6 leaders. So really excited. And the way we're going to be serving Rainbow Acres, by the way, if no one knows who Rainbow Acres is, they're a organization who cares for people, adults with developmental disabilities. So we're going to be going over there. We're going to be serving them. We're going to be helping their facility needs. So we're going to be pulling weeds, but we're also going to be painting. We're going to be doing some landscaping, as well as do some of these different social activities. So we're going to be leading a chapel over there. And so we're going to be serving them and hanging out with them. And it's going to be a really cool event, just to love on them and care for them. And in a way, this trip is also to help our students develop and cultivate a heart for missions, to develop a love for what God's doing, and to even learn a lot about what missions is in that. So they're going to be serving, and they're going to be learning about missions.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome. Yeah, and it's such a great ministry out there.
Yeah,
when you and I went out there,
it's
I mean,
really
it was just a weekend that you and I went there, and I was like in love with everything that they were doing. And I know there was so much more that we didn't get to see, but I'm excited for our students to be able to engage that, experience that, and even like you said, just learn more about the Great Commission and how to live missionally regardless of their context that they're in.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's real cool. Yeah, and I get the pleasure of leading our students for the third year now up to San Francisco with an organization called City Impact. They serve the residents there in the Tenderloin district, and they just do an amazing job of getting students plugged in with different opportunities to serve. I know right now they have several buildings where they have like a soup kitchen where they hand out fresh meals, a little grocery area where they hand out bagged food, which also seconds as a place to worship, and they get weekly services there as well. So that's really cool. Our students, we're taking a team of about 25 students and 5 leaders. Reggie is coming with me, and we're going to go up there and lead those students to serve the Tenderloin residents there. We get to also work with the kids. They have a thing called City Kids where they invite the kids of the parents in there, and they do arts and crafts, and they teach them like little Bible lessons, and they teach them little curriculums, stuff like that. So we look forward to that every year. And I know our students just love being up there. On top of that, one of the my favorite ministries there is that there's a kitchen. So our students will be up there. They'll be actually cooking their own meals for one another. So that's really cool because, they feel kind of accomplished. And I always tell my parents, so when your kid comes down from Frisco, they should be able to cook you a nice meal. So it's on them. But yeah, it's a really cool organization, and we're so excited to do it. And like I said, I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, this will be our third year. And it's just been really a cool way to see kids learn how they can impact not only the residents up there, but when they come back home, they can jump into the local shelters here and the local organizations back at home, and they can kind of see how that works as well.
Yeah.
Speaking of the kitchen, is Kevin still there?
Kevin is still there.
Man.
Kevin's awesome. He's so good.
Yeah, the guy that not just teaches our kids how to cook stuff, but is also preparing all the meals for their school there, for for the homeless outreach. And this guy's like a no joke, Michelin star chef.
Yes.
That walked away from that so that he could serve the Lord in this area.
There you go.
It's one of the coolest things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so just a great guy for our kids to connect with as well.
Yep.
So and I think you hear these guys talking about this. Obviously, first year for us at Rainbow Acres, but that trip's been in the works for a bit. Mm-hmm. Third year back with City Impact, but we've gone to that area in the past. Our hope is to develop some long-term partnerships organizations and ministries that we trust, that we know, that we've vetted well, and that we honestly see them taking this Great Commission seriously. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of service trips we could take that wouldn't be necessarily missional or gospel minded, and so we feel really good about where we've landed right now and these opportunities in front of them, and it's exciting to see us adding Rainbow Acres. We've talked about this junior high opportunity now for years of what would it look like to do a junior high trip, and now expanding even high school into this Montreal trip, which is interesting. The Montreal trip's great. Okay, so we're partnering with a local church there. Some friends of ours, for my wife and I now for quite some time. We took students from a previous church there as well to partner with them. And you came up. You came up last year with Shane, who'll be on the trip with me, and kind of met with Pastor Nick there. Saw Montreal, heard a bit about the need. And it's interesting because every time we talk about Montreal as a mission opportunity, people kind of go, "What? That doesn't really sound like much." And then you begin to really look at the culture of Quebec, you begin to see the ministry, the work that the church is doing. You understand a little more of even the political climate, the history there around even faith. And you realize that this is a very difficult place, that it's a very first world context.
Yeah, absolutely.
They want for very little, but it is a very secular environment. Mm-hmm. And so the largest unreached people group in North America is in Quebec. It's less than 1%. There are actually places in the Middle East that have a greater percentage of evangelical believers than Quebec does, and Montreal, where we'll be. So it'll be a challenging trip for our students in a ton of ways. It's French speaking, so no one knows French, right? Everybody takes Spanish, which does not help you at all.
Not very much.
When you're trying to discern French. So they'll get to experience a church service in French there. We'll be working and kind of helping them pull off their vacation Bible school, their day camp this year. There's a few ministries there as well that the church partners with, that our folks will be partnering with. And then one of my favorite parts of this trip is the church is so gracious that we'll pair kids up and they'll be able to stay in host homes there with us, with them. And so it really is this cultural immersion that you don't really get in many contexts. And so to be able to have this common experience of the trip, but then a fairly unique experience with the families and in the homes there is a really, really cool opportunity. And because the French language is kind of the commonality there, you have folks from all over the world who come from a French-speaking background. Mm-hmm. There's not many places in North America to land, and so Montreal ends up being this great melting spot of that, where we've had students with a Haitian family, in the past, and so they're hanging out with us all day doing day camp. They go home, they're eating Haitian meals and learning, versus another family that maybe is from France, or here's one that has lived in Montreal their whole life. They're French Canadian, and so just a neat opportunity to do that. I think what I love about that trip is, we look at Europe and where Europe has been and where the church has gone. Montreal's not too far behind that,
right? And
we're not too far behind where we're trending. And so I think in each of these trips, it prepares our students for what's coming and what's ahead. Yeah. You can't go to San Francisco and minister in the Tenderloin and come back to the desert and view the homeless the same way.
Right.
You're not going to go to Rainbow Acres and come back and experience people with disabilities or the same way, right? It's going to affect you. And I think Montreal will be similar, right? Yeah. In the sense of, what does it look like to have a conversation with someone about the gospel when they don't care?
Right.
Or they don't want to have that conversation, or they don't understand, or they're skeptical of religion or faith. Yeah. Or when you don't speak the language.
It's exhausting.
Right. And when you're seeing everything and it looks like it should be so familiar, but it's in a different language and nothing makes sense. Like just even the mental drain on that. So it'll be good. That's a little bit longer trip for us. I think it's 12 days for that trip total. So we'll experience 2 weekend services there.
Nice.
For them, leave on a Saturday to fly up, be there the week, and come back the following Monday. Yeah. Which will give us a week with day camp and then a little bit of a block party there in the community. But
nice.
And great food.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man, great food.
I want to go back just for poutine.
Yeah, it's
the poutine, if people don't know what it is, they just have to try it. But I feel like you can only get it there. So
you can only get good poutine.
There we go.
Like we could describe it, but it doesn't sound great, but it's amazing.
Yeah. No, there's so much about that trip that I think are just huge wins for our students that are going on it. One, like you said, the host homes, I think that's incredible. To have that kind of cultural immersion is not always accessible to our students, and so they get that experience. And obviously we know the hosts that are there. We're not sending them off to strangers' homes. Right. So yeah, they're great, godly people that they're staying with, but obviously very culturally different. The other huge win that I think is, we've had so much experience with our students in Mexico, where in Mexico there's not necessarily, at least where we go in Mexico, there's not a huge spiritual need. Right. The gospel is there. The gospel is prevalent, but there's a big felt need. And so in Mexico, they were going and providing for felt need and learning about unreached people groups where spiritual needs were all over the world. And what I'm so excited for with this Montreal trip is I think a lot of those students that went to Mexico and heard about the spiritual need and unreached people groups, they're going to show up in Montreal and go, these are the people we learned about when we were in Mexico.
Yeah.
These are we don't have to build them homes. We're not going to orphanages or anything like that like we did in Mexico. But these were the people that we learned, the unreached people that we learned about. And even when you say that less than 1%, and I know depending on where you go in Quebec, it gets even way less than that.
Yeah.
It can get down to less than 0.5%.
Yeah.
Which is hard for us to comprehend when we talk about percentages of Christianity, because I mean the statistics all over the place in America. You'll hear as high as 50%. I personally think we're somewhere in the 20s.
Yeah.
But 20% of America, 25% of America is Christian. And you think of how many churches, how many believers you engage. Like, what is that like when you're in a culture that has less than 1% Christian?
Yeah, well, when we were there, I think you were part of this conversation. You know, we were talking to one of their students, and maybe you were maybe the one that asked the question, "What's it like in school here?"
Yeah,
and she said, "I'm the only Christian that I know of in my school."
Yeah,
wow.
Right, and so that's a different context.
Yeah, in a school of 2,000 people, she's going, "I'm the only one that she knows of."
So when we were in Atlanta, this is a trip we take. In Atlanta, Georgia's 33% evangelical, give or take, right?
Right.
So the way I would always compare that to give, kind of a visual, is if we were sitting on a park bench and people were walking by, right? In order to see a believer, you're looking at 30 people, right? If we're in Montreal, we're looking at 100, right, or more, like 300.
Absolutely.
It's hundreds before you see a believer, and so I think that is a very sobering reality as our students come alongside their students and learn, hey, what does it look like to be a Christian in your school when no one else is a Christian?
Yeah.
That's very different, because I think a lot of our students, and I'm not trying to minimize here, feel like it's difficult to be a believer here. And yet they have people they know who come here, right, that are in their youth group. And so I think that's such a helpful thing for them to just recognize and realize. And the reality is, like when we talk unreached, often we think of jungle, island, Middle East, and that's a very different context than what we'll find in Montreal. I mean, my very first trip out of the country was to an unreached people group in the mountains of China.
Yeah.
That was very different than what we'll experience in Montreal. And yet both of those contexts, they need the gospel, and someone has to go.
That's it.
Someone has to go. So I love that we come alongside a church and ministry that's already working there. We can kind of come in and bolster their effort a little bit, lay a little groundwork for them, and build some long-term relationships. And what we saw in the past, even going back to the host homes, which we've seen in San Francisco at this point as well too, is year over year going back, you're seeing the same people. Maybe it's Kevin, right? But we would have siblings who would graduate out, and the next would come in, and they would be staying with the same host family. And so over 6 or 7 years, we've got parents here who are now Facebook friends and FaceTiming and sending cards to families in another country who have housed their kids now for multiple years in a row. And so I remember even in Georgia, we had a family from Montreal that was on their way down to Florida for vacation and came by and came to our church and was hanging out with the students that they had hosted and went way out of their way to get to Atlanta to come by and see. So it was just this really cool full circle moment. And our hope again is that the Big Serve leads us into Rainbow Acres, which leads us to a San Francisco, which leads us to a Montreal. Young adults are either heading down to Mexico for a weekend kind of exposure trip, or even into a further thing with Sri Lanka or other opportunities in the future. That we're building a culture of missions. It is a command, but we're not going because we're commanded. We're going because we feel convicted.
Yeah, that's it. That's absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned Sri Lanka, so I'll share a little bit about that trip. So it's kind of cool because, we have with your guys' trips, you're connected to an organization that you're going to. Jody, your trip in Montreal is connected to a church and a pastor who we're friends with up there. Mine is actually 2 missionaries that we here at High Desert Church have supported for over the last decade. They left High Desert Church. They were members here, and God called them to the mission field, and they ended up in Sri Lanka. unfortunately, I can't share a lot about them. I can't say their names right now, and I can't show pictures of them because this video is gonna go online. And the reality is Sri Lanka is a restricted country, meaning that it's not. Restrictions look different everywhere. I mean, even Quebec has restrictions, for sure. Right? In terms of how you can share your faith and whatnot. In Sri Lanka, the big thing is you're not allowed to proselytize. You're not allowed to share your faith. And so then you're like, well, why do you go there then? Because that's illegal. And it's like, well, we go because we're still convicted to do so. And so we have our missionaries there that they're safe, right? But they just have to be careful. And so we have to be mindful of that when we talk about them, not to share their names or faces, because that could pop up anywhere. The government over there can get wind of it and show up at their front door. So with that said, we're very connected with them. And I have a small group of some young adults, some older adults. I mean, our group there's 8 of us total, and we're ranging from 19 years old all the way up to 62 years old. And so it's just awesome just looking at that. I find myself right in the middle of those age groups. But I'm like, yes, we've got some younger folks that when we are drained of energy, like they won't be, so they can do some stuff. But the big thing there is Sri Lanka is also considered unreached. There's 3 dominant religions there. You've got Hindu, you have Buddhist, and then you have Muslim. And the government is Buddhist. A lot of the people are Hindu, but where we will be in particular is with a Muslim people group. And so we're really excited about that. They are, just because of the work and the influence that our missionaries have had there, they've become very interested in the gospel. Not a lot of positive response to it yet, but they're starting to, I mean, you talk about 10 years, actually almost 12 years down the road of work that our missionaries have been doing, and they're starting to see more and more people just ask questions, right? Very few converts, but the you can tell the Holy Spirit's really working in that area. And one of the questions that I first got, we had a lot of people apply to go on that trip. There's some very obviously strict parameters of who can go and whatnot. And so once I got that team put together, the question that I kept getting is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I get it. That's how we are, right? We like to do the checklist, right? But we're going to a very different culture that doesn't think that way. And I said, we have to stop thinking about what we're going to do and start focusing on who we're going to be. And that was the biggest thing, because again, we can't just share the gospel with anybody we want to on the streets. The opportunities that we'll have to share the gospel are going to be with people that our missionaries say they're okay to talk to. And so they already know these people, they have that relationship with them, but ultimately we're just going to be the light of Christ there. We're also going to be an encouragement to our missionaries. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize about missionaries in the world is that they live in isolation. And they go and they leave their friends, they leave their family, they leave their Sealy Posturepedic mattress. I mean, like all this stuff that they've become accustomed to and have grown comfortable with here, and they go somewhere in the world where it becomes very difficult for them to make friends and connections with, because just there's a cultural barrier. And so at least I can say with these missionaries, they've done a great job at building those relationships within their village. But still, they still feel that isolation from their friends back home and their family back home. And so for us to be able to go there and just be present with them is such a big encouragement to them. And that's, for me, that's one of the primary reasons that we're going, is just to be a blessing to them and an encouragement to them. So, we have to be careful about the checklist, because that's a very Western way of thinking.
Yeah.
And I had to, in one of our trainings, I had to explain to our team that when we have meals, I say this loosely, we'll go to a restaurant, but when I say we're still like, it's dirt floor, thatch roof, it's just somebody does the cooking for you and you'll pay them for it. So can't think of, like going to Texas Roadhouse, because that's not what the restaurants are there. But I explained to our team that, here, that when we share a meal, it's for the food, right? The purpose of getting together for dinner is for the food, not necessarily the people. Even though you might love the people you're sharing a meal with, but if you sit down at a restaurant and and you say, and you order your food, even though you're with the people you love, if 30, 40 minutes goes by and your food's not out, excuse me, where's our food?
Right.
But in Sri Lanka, it's the other way around. And so mealtime is about the people, not necessarily about the food. So when we go to places to eat, I have to explain to the team, it might be hours. Like, no joke, one time I was there, it was 2 hours before they brought us our food because they thought they were interrupting us because we had a group together, we were enjoying each other's company, and I'm starving, so I just want to eat. So it's just it's super fun to give some exposure to our folks here at HDC to just different cultures. Really does pull us out of our comfort zone, and each one of these trips is that. Your students will be pulled out of their comfort zone at Rainbow Acres. Yours certainly will up in the Tenderloin, San Francisco. Montreal, same deal. And again, it's incrementally, right? I would say Sri Lanka and Montreal, they're going to feel the most out of their comfort zone. Yeah. But we don't want to throw them in the deep end. And we don't want that to be their first trip. We want to build them up. And so I love what the student team is doing with that. Essentially just kind of turning up the fire, getting it a little hotter at a time, so that when they end up at a Montreal or a Sri Lanka, or maybe they go to Africa with me or wherever, that they're like, oh yeah, I've been preparing for this since I was 7th grade. Yeah. Super cool. Yeah. So
and honestly, it's as much for the parents as it is for the students.
Oh, for sure.
Right. Like, it's a big deal to let your kids go.
I know. I lived it.
And as a parent, even, I think if there's parents watching, even just to encourage them to, like, what does it look like to learn to trust the Lord with your kids as you feel you're being obedient and allowing them to be sent out. Yeah. I think that is maybe even scarier than it is for the kid to say yes to. Right? And so what do we model to our kids as parents when we say, yeah, we're going to trust the Lord with this, and that we believe he's called us to go, and so we want you to be willing to put your yes on the table, and we'll trust the Lord with that. And I think we see that year over year with parents who almost grow so much from sending than going themselves. And so I think for us as a church and as a family, we're trending in such a healthy place towards missions. And I think running at it more intentionally the further we get out of COVID and as restrictions have lifted and those types of things as well. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for us.
Yep, for sure. And the reality is, Ethan, you're still a young man, but the rest of us, we have adult kids. Like, we all were in that season where we were gonna, and for me, like, I'm the missions pastor. Am I gonna be the one? Like, I was terrified sometimes to send my kids, but here I was preaching, hey, parents, trust the Lord. And now all of a sudden I gotta put, my money where my mouth is and trust the Lord with my own kids. Yeah. And so I get it, man. Like, and I know you guys get it too. Like, and that's what I love about, our student ministry team as well, is because you guys, you have that experience. Like, you're not asking parents to do anything you yourselves have not done.
Yeah, for sure.
And so in that, like, there's wisdom going on these trips, like, you guys have all led numerous trips, done numerous things with students. And so that was what helped me feel comfortable sending my kids, was one, like, okay, yes, I trust the Lord, but I also trust the guys that are leading this trip,
Yeah, I think we always are approaching this with the parents in mind. I mean, I think we do that with everything.
You have to.
I mean, we say that so often. I think people probably get tired of me saying, like, man, our desire really is to partner with parents, come alongside them. And this is another area where we want to help them, grow and disciple their kid. And you're right. I mean, we've all taken our own kids. We took our oldest, who's 21 now, but when she was 10, she went to El Salvador with us. We were taking a team of students, and we brought her with us. And that's a different kind of different stakes there when you're doing that. But you just watch God honor that and bless that. And I think we take these kids and we treat them as our own, and we are mindful of their parents, and we want to make sure, again, back to the people we're partnering with, be that in location or even to the host home thing. We're putting them in positions to succeed and be safe.
Exactly.
And recognizing there's always risk. There's risk everywhere we go or not going. And I think
that's what most people don't think about.
Yeah, I think one of the more sobering things, I remember being in Bible college early on, and we were having a missions emphasis week, and it was like, the most dangerous place to be is outside of the will of God. And thinking in terms of missions, like, oh gosh, if God is calling me to go and I say no because I'm afraid, I'm putting myself at a greater risk because I didn't obey.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I'm promised safety if I go either, right?
Right.
And so the task then is to discern and figure out if God is really calling me to go.
Yeah.
The safest place I can be is to go.
Mm-hmm.
And for parents to consider that with their kids as well is the same.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, even in one of our first Sri Lanka team training meetings, I asked, how many of you are worried? So it's me and 7 others, right? How many of you have concerns about this trip? And every hand went up, including my own. Yeah. Because that's the reality, right? Like there's nerves about it that we're all going to experience. But again, like if the Lord is calling us to this, what more do we have to respond to then?
That's good.
We're operating in that, disobedience then at that point. And man, I don't want to stand before the Lord in disobedience, Yeah. But yeah, I get it. Missions is to put yourself on a plane, to put a family member on a plane, to go somewhere in the world where it's just different, is nerve-wracking. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what a lot of the fear comes from, is the reality that you're just unfamiliar with where your kids might be going. And I remember having conversations with parents about Mexico, like, man, I can't believe you would I would not let my kid go down there. It's unsafe down there. There's cartels down there. And I'm like, okay, like I hear that. And I get, you see that stuff on the news all the time, but I would pull up the violent crime statistics in the high desert and then where we go in Mexico. And I would show them that they are far more likely to experience a violent crime right here in the high desert than they are where we go in Mexico. But the main fear that people have is just like, I don't know where my kid is. I can't see it right in my mind's eye. And I get that. Like as a parent, I am 100% on that one,
Yeah.
But it's trying to process some of that concern, even for myself when I go somewhere or my kids go somewhere, or I'm leading a team somewhere, I know we all kind of try to think through, we're all those type A planners, we want to make sure that we think through like worst case scenarios, best case scenario, like any scenario we want to have thought through. And so, there's a lot of thought and planning and preparation that goes into these trips that are, that are specifically focused on the care of our trip or of our team, but also on the ministry side of it as well. Like, and I think that's what's a challenge as a group leader, right? Is you're trying to balance that. I've got to care for my team's like physical and emotional well-being, but I'm also trying to put together ministry plans, that like we want to do the Lord's work there, not just show up and eat poutine or, play basketball or, hand out food. There's so much more that we're trying to plan and that our groups get to be a part of. And that's what's super cool because like you guys said, a lot of the stuff that we do on these trips is stuff we do here.
Yeah.
But man, you do that in a different context and you come back here and you are on fire for that. So that is my favorite thing. Cause I would, especially when I would do student trips, I would love to follow up with the parents and just be like, so tell me about your child now that they've come back.
Yeah.
And every time they're like, what happened there? Cause that is not the same kid that I put on that bus when they left.
So cool.
So I'm just curious, and I think maybe we're going to do this anyway, but as you're thinking through Sri Lanka, obviously, and we're thinking through these specifics for people watching, like how should they pray?
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a lot that what you just said, even that, like maybe.
Yeah, I'm the practical side of me says, pray for travel, pray for safety, pray for just nobody gets sick, stuff like that. Yeah. But I think that often is our default, and we never end up praying for the ministry that we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And so while it's important for us to be praying for those practical elements of the trips, I think the first and foremost is that we should be praying for, one, the hearts of the people that we are going to be with and serve, but then also the hearts of our teammates, and even us as the leaders, that God would continue to grow our own hearts for him through these opportunities that we have to serve him cross-culturally.
Yeah. That's good.
So, that's a good question. What are maybe some of the specific things that each of us could mention to our folks to be praying for our unique trips?
I think you covered like the practical needs perfectly, right?
Yeah.
That's what we need prayer for. But I mean, I think on top of it, and even saying, pray for our kids, pray for the people we're serving. I think there's also an element of praying for the organization or missionary that we're going to be helping in this time. And that's a prayer that doesn't just stop here, right? That's a prayer that keeps on going after even these trips. Just continue to pray for those organizations, or continue to pray for those missionaries. And so, pray for our kids, pray for any nerves that they may have, pray for, that no one gets sick, or everybody stay safe on the trip. Be praying for those missionaries and those organizations as well.
Yeah, for me, I would say obviously definitely covered all those. Pray for our kids, trips, pray for the travel, all that good stuff for sure. And obviously the people that are already there in the organizations is huge. But for one, I would say the cities that those organizations are connected to, because they are in the fight and they are contending for those communities, for those residents. They're they're fighting for those kids and just trying to, like, that community there. They're just really involved in there. And so I would pray for that community. Obviously, San Francisco, city, pray for that. And Rainbow Acres, the cities they're connected to, and Montreal, Quebec, and obviously in Sri Lanka. It's like, we pray for those. That organization would just have a broader impact in that community there, because it's so desperately needed. So I would ask parents to, on top of all those other things, pray for us and the kiddos, but man, pray for those communities in general. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think of a few things. I think of compassion, like that. Our teams would have compassion towards those they serve. I think it's easy to walk in and feel like you have the savior complex and I'm going to fix it and almost look past the people to the mission or the task. And so I think I would ask people to pray that our teams would have compassion for those that we serve, because some of them will be difficult to love. And we are called to love even those that are difficult. And so I think compassion, I would say courage as well. We're going to have a lot of opportunities to have conversations with people, and it's easier sometimes to not do that. And year over year, we take students on these trips, and we watch the students and the folks that go. The ones who really get the most out of the trip, and we see God use the most, are the ones who step in, lean in early in the week, and kind of overcome the fear and show some courage to step in and have those conversations, or step in and try to speak the language, or try the food they've never heard of or seen. And so I would think courage would be a big one. And then I think just an openness on the other end for those that we'll talk to and have conversations with and serve. I think it's easy to share the gospel. It's scary to share the gospel, but it's easy to share the gospel. But it's not always received when we share the gospel. And in some of these contexts, it's not a direct explanation of how you would share the gospel with someone. And so just an openness for those that we are able to share with and do talk to, that they would be willing to listen, that God would be even now preparing the hearts of those that we'll meet and talk to, whether they're kids or adults or parents or folks on the street, or wherever that looks like. I think those three are probably the things that come to mind: is that compassion, courage, and then just an openness.
And I would say, just for my trip in particular, there's a guy there, and he's a Sri Lankan that converted as a result of the ministry that's there. And he's a young man. Obviously, I wouldn't share his name, but we can give him a fake name, Eric, right? It's nowhere near his real name, but I just think of the challenges there for him, because for us and our missionaries, the funny thing is we're Westerners, so it's almost like it's expected that we be Christian. For him, that's a radical life change, and his people look at him differently, because of that. And so, yet he loves the Lord and loves the ministry and is a huge part of it. And so I would say for our folks, just be praying for him as he, ministers to people in a way that no one else can minister, because he knows their language, he knows their culture, he knows, who they are, and so, just pray for him specifically. But
that's cool.
But yeah. So,
well, it's been fun. Thanks.
It has been fun. Yeah. I
Yeah.
appreciate you guys jumping in on this and even sharing about your trips and what missions is and all that with our folks. And so hope you have enjoyed this. And if you have any questions about missions, any one of us is willing to chat with you. We're all at different campuses all the time, and we're here at the office. So you know where to call us, you know where to see us. And yeah, we would love to talk more about this with you. But thanks for joining us today, and have a good one.